Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. I want to thank all of you for coming for what we hope here at the WTO will be a really wonderful occasion, our second presidential lecture. So, Your Excellency, Dr. Mokgweetsi Masisi, President of the Republic of Botswana, Your Excellency, First Lady of Botswana, Mrs. Ngozi Masisi, welcome. Honorable Ministers, Director General of the United Nations, Ms. Tatiana Valovaya, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted to welcome all of you to this second WTO presidential lecture. We started this series last year to bring leading voices from around the world here to the WTO to share ideas, experiences, and policy proposals. The goal was to bring fresh thinking to policymakers, which we would be able to draw upon in our efforts to use trade to deliver for people and for the planet. We meet at a time of worsening growth and development prospects. The shocks of COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine have been followed by inflation and monetary tightening. Now we have this unacceptable war in Sudan. Extreme poverty is rising, while growth potential has declined in advanced and developing economies alike, according to the World Bank. The challenges are perhaps most acute in Africa, where per capita output in most countries remains well below pre-pandemic trends. People on the continent are especially vulnerable to high food and energy costs, and fragility and conflict, such as we are experiencing now on the continent, does not help. Widespread debt distress threatens future investments in health and education. The continent is also most exposed to the impacts of climate change, a problem that Africans did little to create. We can and we must use every tool at our disposal, and that very much includes trade and the WTO, to rekindle growth in Africa and around the world. That's why I'm so pleased and so honored to welcome as our speaker today His Excellency the President of Botswana, Dr. M.E.K. Masisi. Since taking office in 2018, President Masisi has emerged as an outstanding and thought-provoking leader, recognized far beyond his country's borders. Among the international leadership positions he has held was the chairmanship of the Southern African Development Community Organ on Politics, Defense, and Security. President Masisi previously served as Vice President and leader of the House of the National Assembly, as well as in several ministerial portfolios, including education. Earlier in his career, he worked for UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, developing and implementing education programs for young people in remote areas of Botswana. He's a graduate of Florida State University and the University of Botswana, and was a Chevening Scholar. For those who don't know, this is a very prestigious scholarship in the UK, and he did this at Manchester University. Drawing on his past experiences, as well as his vision for his country's future, President Masisi will speak about what Africa expects from the WTO multilateral trading system, and how the organization can best support delivering meaningful impact for the continent. It is appropriate that a Botswana leader should speak to us about realizing the continent's potential, because if you're not familiar with Botswana's economic track record since independence in 1966, you should be. The beginnings were not promising. In the words of the distinguished economists Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson, quote, when the British left, there were 12 kilometers of paved road, 22 Botswana who had graduated from university, and 100 from secondary school, unquote. The country is landlocked and relied heavily on a single natural resource, two factors typically associated with weaker economic performance. And yet, between 1965 and 1998, Botswana's economy grew at an average annual rate of 7.7%, one of the highest in the world. Diamond revenues were invested in public goods like infrastructure, health, and education, and saved for future generations through a sovereign wealth fund. The economy diversified as services and household consumption grew. Today, the country has over 10,000 kilometers of paved roads, and its tertiary education institutions graduate 12,000 students every year. When so much of the continent was falling behind the rest of the world, Botswana was narrowing the gap, becoming the first country to graduate from least developed country status back in 1994. The three economists I mentioned earlier found that Botswana's economic miracle was above all the product of good policy, effective institutions, particularly those protecting private property, together with political leadership that was both responsible and responsive. The country today is moving up the diamond value chain, adding jobs and investment in cotton polishing and other value-added activities. Beef exports to Europe are another example of successful value chain development. So with less than 0.2% of Africa's population, Botswana in 2022 accounted for 1.3% of the value of the continent's merchandise exports. Nevertheless, Botswana still faces challenges familiar to many of us: export diversification, creating jobs and skills for the rising generation, and achieving growth that is both socially equitable and environmentally sustainable. President Masisi's government has already started to answer these questions with its Reset agenda, promoting digital technology and job creation for young people, especially through value chain development in key sectors, such as mining, tourism, agriculture, and education. I think I can speak for all of us here when I say that we are looking forward to listening to President Masisi's vision for how the WTO can best support the pursuit of these goals in Botswana and across the continent. Now, you're here to listen to President Masisi, not me. I was just listening to myself, and I said, you're going on too long. And I can see Dr. Athaliah laughing, which means I'm right. Before closing, though, I want to extend a big thank you to the many people who made today's event possible. The WTO's Botswana leader, whom I just mentioned, our wonderful GC chair, Ambassador Athaliah Molokomme, and her team at the Permanent Mission of Botswana, the Secretariat Divisions for Knowledge Management, and Verna, where are you? The DGO, our Information and External Relations groups, and of course, our indomitable moderator, CNN's own Zain Asher. So without further ado, let me now invite His Excellency to the podium. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Distinguished ministers, ambassadors, your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. It's a great honor for me to be here today to address such a prestigious gathering, to speak on a topic that intends to express the aspirations of the African continent in the multilateral trading system. Director General, let me take this opportunity to express my appreciation and admiration for you and the entire WTO Secretariat for the outstanding job you do to advance the interests of the WTO members and their communities. I commend your team for the exceptional work which has undoubtedly contributed to the organization's success and positive impact. As many of you are aware, Botswana has been a member of the World Trade Organization since May 31st, 1995. Prior to joining the WTO, Botswana graduated from being a least developed country in 1994. This transition was not an easy one and came with numerous multifaceted challenges that required our attention. We believe that trade has the potential to improve the standards of living if carried out in a manner that ensures that developing and least developed countries secure an equitable share correspondent to their needs and economic development. It is our wish and hope that the trade and rules should be mutually advantageous and non-discriminatory to all members of the WTO. Africa is facing numerous challenges that have hindered our economic development, especially in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has had devastating effects on the health and well-being of our citizens as well as on our economies. Therefore, Africa expects the WTO to facilitate fair trade that will allow us to participate fully in the global economy, especially as we continue to grapple with the effects of the pandemic. As a concerned developing country, it is important to acknowledge Botswana's efforts in containing the COVID-19 pandemic. Like many other countries, Botswana has implemented various measures such as lockdowns, limiting travel, and enforcing the use of masks to control the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in slowing down the spread of the virus, although Botswana still experiences a significant number of COVID-19 cases. In terms of vaccine supply and administration, as a middle-income country, Botswana had to procure vaccines for her citizens, and many face challenges. My government procured vaccines through the COVAX facility and bilateral agreements with other countries. However, as a self-financing country, we had to procure vaccines at exorbitantly high prices, and we experienced unbelievable delays in deliveries. One of the biggest challenges that Botswana and many other developing countries have to face in securing vaccines is the limited supply available on the global market. Wealthier countries were able to purchase large quantities of vaccines, leaving limited supplies for developing countries. This has led to an unequal distribution of vaccines, leaving many developing countries struggling to secure enough doses for their populations. To address these challenges, there is a need for a coordinated global response. The World Trade Organization, WTO, can play a crucial role in assisting developing countries prepare for future pandemics. One way that WTO can assist is by supporting the waiver of intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines, which would allow developing countries to produce vaccines locally and increase their availability. This would reduce their dependence on imports and help to address the issue of limited supply. I must also applaud the WTO for their efforts in trying to address trade restrictive measures, which had a significant impact on the availability and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines globally, particularly in developing countries. This included calling for the removal of trade barriers for medical supplies and essential goods, including vaccines, and urging countries to work together to ensure the availability and equitable access to vaccines and other pharmaceutical products globally. Moreover, I'd like to express my appreciation for the joint efforts of the WTO, WHO, and WIPO in facilitating the exchange of information and knowledge pertaining to COVID-19, with a particular focus on the development of vaccines and treatments. I applaud your efforts to prevent trade policies from impeding the flow of vital medical supplies and advocating for stronger international collaboration in addressing the pandemic. Permit me to share Botswana's experience in this regard. In our quest to ensure good health for our citizens, we have encountered business practices of large pharmaceutical companies that are at best prohibitive. This conduct, some of which verges on the monopolistic, has the effect of limiting our ability as sovereign states to regulate and enhance efficiency of procurement of medicines and pharmaceutical products in a fair environment. Exclusive licensing regimes compromise the sovereign rights of nation states. It is the view of my government that WTO and WHO, with others, should prevail and address such. The issue of least developing countries is a matter of utmost importance and requires careful consideration within the framework of the WTO, particularly with regards to the graduation of LDCs. This is a complex issue that demands a sensitive and nuanced approach to ensure that the concerns and needs of these countries are adequately addressed. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and unequal distribution of COVID-19 vaccines was a testament of how vulnerable these countries truly are. It is imperative that the WTO devotes sufficient attention to this matter and takes into account the unique challenges faced by LDCs in their efforts to integrate into the global economy. Important lessons can be learned from the challenges of landlocked developing countries, such as Botswana, who have graduated to middle and upper middle income status. I also wish to highlight that regional integration is an issue of importance to Botswana and the African region. Africa has made significant progress towards regional integration, with the most recent African Continental Free Trade Area a flagship project of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. The objective of the AFCTA is to significantly boost intra-Africa trade, particularly trade in value-added production and trade across all sectors of Africa's economy. However, more work lies ahead to fully realize the benefits of regional integration. The WTO should support African countries in their efforts to create a seamless trading system within the continent, as well as promoting trade between Africa and the rest of the world. In addition to regional integration, Africa is also focused on industrialization and economic diversification, which are critical for Africa's development. We need to move beyond being solely dependent on the export of raw materials and instead develop value-added industries that will create jobs and increase our economic resilience. Moreover, Agenda 2063, Africa's development blueprint, outlines the need for sustainable development and eradication of poverty and inequality. As such, we expect the WTO to support these goals and ensure that trade benefits everyone, not just a select few. This includes promoting sustainable development practices and ensuring that trade agreements do not have negative impacts on the environment. With regards to the promotion of gender equality and women's empowerment in the field of trade, Botswana has made significant efforts in promoting women and youth empowerment and inclusivity. We recognize the important role that women and youth play in the development of the country, and we have implemented policies and programs to support their participation in various sectors. Botswana has implemented affirmative action policies to promote the participation of women in politics, trade, and other sectors. My government has also established the Women's Economic Empowerment Program, which provides training and financial assistance to women entrepreneurs. Additionally, Botswana has implemented laws and policies to protect women's rights and to address gender-based violence. Botswana has established the National Youth Council, which aims to empower young people and promote their participation in the development of the country. The government has also implemented various programs to support youth employment and entrepreneurship. It is worth noting that here at the WTO, Botswana is a founding member of the WTO Informal Working Group on Trade Gender and has been co-chair of the group together with El Salvador and Iceland. We have worked with other members of the group to advocate for and promote trade policies and programs that are gender responsive. We expect the WTO to continue its efforts to promote gender equality and social inclusion in the global trading system. Women and marginalized groups often face significant barriers to accessing trade opportunities, and this has negative impacts on their economic empowerment and well-being. The WTO should work towards creating a more inclusive trading system that ensures that all members of society can benefit from the opportunities that trade provides. Before I conclude, my dear Director General, I wish to take this opportunity to congratulate you and the WTO members for a historical achievement during the 12th Ministerial Conference last year, June. I believe the outcome of the conference has brought about a revitalized sense of trust among the members. It is evident that this renewed spirit of collaboration is essential for the successful functioning of the organization, and I'd like to emphasize the importance of implementing the MC12 decisions in a manner that is acceptable to all members. Botswana, and I believe Africa at large, recognizes the significance of these outcomes in shaping the future of global trade. Therefore, it is imperative to ensure that the implementation process is transparent and inclusive, taking into account the diverse needs and concerns of all members. Only by doing so can the WTO build a sustainable framework for global trade that benefits all nations, particularly developing countries. I wish to urge all members to prioritize transparency and dialogue in the implementation process. It is crucial to foster an environment where all voices are heard and all concerns are addressed to achieve an outcome that is satisfactory to all. This collaborative approach will not only promote trust among the WTO members, but will also ensure that the benefits of the MC12 outcomes are realized by all, particularly developing countries who are in dire need of support to strengthen their economies and participate more fully in global trade. As preparations for the 13th Ministerial Conference are underway, it is important that the concerns and interests of all developing countries, particularly those in Africa, are adequately addressed in the discussions. We need to ensure that developing countries have the policy space to implement policies that support their development objectives. Most importantly, I urge WTO to work towards creating a more inclusive and sustainable trading system that will allow Africa to realize its full potential. My government looks forward to working closely with the WTO in the years ahead to achieve these important goals. Director General, let me once again thank you for the good work you continue to do since the last 2 years following your appointment. As a results-oriented individual, I understand that the journey ahead may not always be smooth. Nonetheless, I urge you to persevere and remain steadfast in your pursuits. Progress is evident, and I believe that many of us here in this room can attest to all is well. I understand you are a firm believer in the power of trade to lift people in developing countries out of poverty and assist them to achieve robust economic growth and sustainable development. We share the same sentiment. Let me thank you also for affording me this opportunity to speak with you and the distinguished guests present today. I look forward to working very closely with the WTO and other international organizations to achieve goals aimed at realizing Africa's full potential. I thank you for your kind attention. Ula.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, President Masisi, and obviously Director General for your remarks beforehand. And I also would like to offer a word of thanks to Ambassador Athaliah Molokomme as well. Going back to your lecture, President Masisi, I think that one of the things that I found really interesting in what you said was really about just how vulnerable Botswana has been to certain economic shocks. I mean, you think about Botswana's trajectory since independence and how much of an economic miracle it has been, given some of the headwinds. And really, as a country and as a nation, it's beaten so many odds, you know, achieving an annualized growth rate of about 7.5% per year. Really incredible. But still, when it came to the pandemic, the country was left exposed, extremely vulnerable. And you pointed out some of the issues that many African countries have complained about, including the exorbitant high prices of vaccines, also the limited supplies, as Western countries essentially hoarded many of the vaccines for themselves. Just in terms of where we go from here, I'm wondering what you think the WTO, A, should do to prepare African countries for some of these economic shocks that are going to happen, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's, for example, the war in Ukraine, which has left many African countries vulnerable to food insecurity. And on top of that, given the WTO's policy of open trade policies and open borders, etc., how do you balance interdependence without overdependence? I think that's crucial for African nations to consider.
Well, thank you very much, Zain, not only for your very kind, considerate words, but also for the question. I think it's important that WTO, in collaboration obviously with its members, because it's a membership-driven organization, sets rules. It's a rules-based organization. And these rules are principled rules. If we are to be citizens of this world, and if we are to live up to the aspirations of everybody of development and realizing a certain standard of living, we ought to follow those rules and ensure that we do not compromise any of our other members. Mm-hmm. That also speaks to the rules of trade. And among the rules that we'd want the WTO to focus strongly on would be rules that ensure that there is sufficient protection of the most vulnerable and weak, particularly when we face a crisis. And every pandemic is a crisis. I mean, let's face it. If we did not get the vaccines, we would have faced imminent expiration. Now, how do you sit comfortable as a member of the WTO, and how do you sit in a global assembly and be comfortable in being a citizen of the world when a significant percentage of the world is exterminated because of a lack of vaccines, something readily available and tradable? So I think WTO ought to strengthen our rule-making procedures, ought to strengthen our rules, and ought to make sure that there's sufficient protection for those who are most vulnerable.
Director General, can I have you comment on that?
Well, thank you. First of all, let me thank His Excellency for a really clear lecture with clear signals for what he thinks the WTO can do for Africa and for the vulnerable countries. I agree with the comments that His Excellency has made, that part of what we need to do at the WTO is see how we can really set out to create the space for the most vulnerable to be able to be protected during these times of crisis. I think that if you look at our rules and the way we do have programs, exceptions, the creation of some space for least developed countries. His Excellency spoke, even though Botswana is not a least developed country, I was struck by his plea that they need to be particularly taken care of and that we should deliver for them. And there are provisions within our rules and the way we do business to make sure that least developed countries have a special sense and a special category, a special space to be able to do things differently. You know, maybe take longer, be more protected, have more space to do them. I think the issue is, do we always live up to this? And it's one thing to have that, the other is to deliver. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to deliver on the aspirations of least developed countries, and to help make sure that they have the space they need in actual fact when these kinds of occasions do arise. The provision is there, but activating it, I think, can be more timely in the way that we implement these things to protect least developed countries is something that I think is very important. In that regard, in our upcoming ministerial, I hope we'll be able to deliver, to have some deliverables that least developed countries are asking for. In particular, you know, graduation and some other proposals that are on the table. I don't want to go into too much detail. Mm-hmm. But going beyond that, I think that there are two things. His Excellency spoke of supporting African integration, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and we have been. I have to say that we just spent about 4 million, the equivalent of 4 million Swiss francs in the past couple of years, helping different African countries build capacity they need to be able to comply with some of the protocol that is needed for the African Continental Free Trade Area. We have been working also with some other organizations like the World Bank and so on to try and deliver this kind of support. But what I also want to say is that on our own side, His Excellency touched on something very important. We cannot trade more, either among ourselves, where it's only 17 to 18% of intra-Africa trade, or less than 3% of external trade, unless we add more value to our products. And that's what we really need to focus on. So we ourselves need to figure out how to attract investment into the continent so we can add more value. That way, we can trade more with each other, and the WTO will certainly be there to help. We have an investment facilitation agreement that is being negotiated amongst 109 countries. And the idea is to take away all those bureaucratic hurdles in the way of investment. It's a plurilateral, so it's not a multilateral instrument, but we now have almost 2/3 of our members engaging in this. If we can make investment more attractive on the continent so we can add value to our raw materials, we can trade more among ourselves, we can export more to the outside. And this is one of the things, creating the rules of the game that make investment possible. I think these are some of the things the WTO can, should, and is trying to deliver.
Yeah, Director General, I really loved what you said there, just about this idea that you can't really trade more unless you add more value, and adding value is crucial to attracting investment. And I also thought that your answer about, yes, in theory, the WTO wants to protect some of the smaller LDCs, but of course, in practical terms, it can be quite difficult. I thought that was a very mature response. I do want to open it up now to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. And just a reminder that this is a forum for questions, not statements, and we are up against the clock, so please keep your questions relatively brief. So please raise your hand if you have any questions, and I'll give you the floor. Ambassador Solomon. Okay, I see Ambassador Solomon of Cameroon. If you could stand up and pose your question.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor. As you said, I'm the ambassador of Cameroon to the United Nations and other international organizations, and currently the coordinator of WTO African Group. Thank you, Madam DG, for organizing another brilliant lecturer series, and we are extremely delighted to welcome a great leader from Africa to the WTO. Excellency, Mr. President, we commend your leadership, and we appreciate Botswana's economic performance, which continues to be impressive with an economy which expanded at approximately 5.8% in 2022. We are also extremely, as the DG said, proud to have a brilliant and a dynamic chairperson of the General Council, Ambassador Athaliah Molokomme, who is coordinating from Botswana. Excellency, Mr. President, having listened carefully to your inspiring and thought-provoking lecture, in your view, is the African Continental Free Trade Area really the jet engine that will promote Africa's industrialization agenda and accelerate Africa integration in the multilateral trading system? I thank you.
Shall I?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Solomon, it was, from Cameroon. Well, the FCTA, Your Excellency, if implemented effectively and supported it by targeted investment in key areas, education, infrastructure, and such, has a potential to be a key driver of economic growth throughout the continent. And by promoting regional integration and reducing trade barriers, the FCTA could also create a more competitive business environment in which trade could take place. And a more competitive environment would invariably attract investment. And with that investment, it goes to the point made earlier by the DG, you would often get a possibility of the technology and the investment required to add value to your goods and therefore make them more tradable. The success in promoting Africa's industrialization agenda and accelerating its integration into the multilateral trading system hinges on a number of factors, several actually. And these include the effective implementation of the agreement itself. So the coordination out from Accra would be very important. We need to resolve our infrastructure challenges throughout Africa and the mitigation of non-tariff barriers to trade. We also, Mr. Ambassador, will find a need, there'll be a need for more efficient, more sufficient support and capacity building to enable African businesses to fully leverage the opportunities presented by the agreement. And therefore capacity building, as was said, through WTO or World Bank or any other, would be useful to help build that capacity in the firms and in the countries. Thank you.
Can I just ask the Director General to respond to that as well and comment on that, talking about the infrastructure challenges and the need for capacity building when it comes to the implementation of the FTA?
Well, I think His Excellency has given a great answer. So, no, I think it can be the engine. And we should really not miss this opportunity to make it work for us.
It does dovetail quite nicely with with basically what the WTO's agenda is as well.
Absolutely, and we are very much in support of it. Like His Excellency said, I personally feel this is an opportunity in front of us. If we miss it, we are going to miss big. That's my opinion about the African Continental Free. It's the largest free trade area in the world. Mm-hmm. And so whatever it is that is in the way of making it work, we should do away with it. And to that extent, we're already, at the WTO, we're already collaborating to make it work. But we ourselves as Africans, we have to acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do. Like His Excellency said, nobody is going to do it for us. We have to do it for ourselves. We have to remove the barriers to people moving freely. I think we're almost getting there. But the One Africa passport, I had one. I don't know if people know there's a passport that, an Africa passport. His Excellency, you have one. Because they started by giving it to heads of state. And then they gave it, I used to be head of an AU organization, and they gave it to us. And it was marvelous. So I could go to any African country, and I did. I didn't need a visa. So that it's things like that are going to make the African Continental Free Trade Area work for trade.
Yes. Okay, does anyone else have any questions? Okay, Ambassador Castillo of Honduras.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to address to you, Honorable President Masisi. Let me start congratulating you for the representation that you have here in Geneva, led by Ambassador Molokomme. And here's my question. You have been talking about the pandemic, but I just would like to go a little bit further, and I would like to see what are the key takeaways from Botswana's experience with the COVID-19 pandemic, and how does your country plan to utilize these lessons to improve its preparedness for future pandemics? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. There are several key takeaways. One is we need to make sure that our systems are functioning, but also are talking to one another. You know, right from the health information system to the people movement systems. We also need to make sure that our capacity to detect is up to scratch. When the pandemic hit in my country, we didn't even have the capacity to detect if one had COVID or not. We had to send samples to a neighboring country, South Africa. That's how poorly prepared we were. We didn't have the infrastructure in the cold chain system to keep some of the vaccines that were being produced early on. We didn't have the capacity to ramp up our infrastructure quickly enough when there were surges of hospitalization and need for treatment. That's at the rudimentary level. What is most striking is that we had no capacity whatsoever to produce any therapeutic. Zero. And so it's like a fire engulfing your home, and you don't even have a broom to try and put a fire out, you know? I mean, a broom is not the best thing to put a fire out, but we didn't even have anything as rudimentary as that. And, you know, I could go on and on and on. And so the lessons and the quick turnaround we had to get into first, because we were a democratic country, we had to dialogue with our people and express as transparently as possible that these are our findings, these are our limitations. And a lot of it was done through Parliament because we had to redo a lot of things. So our budget was completely undermined. We had just passed the budget, and 2 days after we passed it, it was completely undermined. And a week later, I had to call Parliament back to sit and declare a state of emergency, because under our rules, it's only under a state of emergency can you limit people's rights and privileges. And so we contained people's movements. We made it clear we're going to do away with the budget, and we put in a recovery budget. It was so bad that coming down from more than 20 months supply, or enough foreign currency to support 20 months, more than 20 months of imports, we were down to a cash system. We were getting paid and paying for vaccines, getting paid, paying for therapeutics, getting paid, paying for PPEs. It was really bad. And so we also had to accelerate our research and development. And I had to put my cabinet together and the ruling party central committee for us to rethink what we're going to do. And that's how the research agenda came about. We literally had to reset. So a big takeaway is agility is important. You need to be brave and face the onslaught head on and be willing to act quickly, decisively. So, unfortunately now, we may be the oldest, longest running, uninterrupted multi-party democracy in Africa, but I think we probably also hold the record for having the longest state of emergency in Africa. What a paradox. What a paradox. But we had to do it because those are what the rules provided we do. So agility was completely important. And, I would only urge that in our attempts to create, to enhance value chains, we must spend more money on research and development. We must spend more money on developing patents and making sure we protect our intellectual capacity. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, gentlemen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency. Thank you so much. My name is Ambassador Mohammed Ukar from the Gambia. Thank you for a very inspiring engagement here today. We're very, very pleased. The question I have, Your Excellency, the world is increasingly moving digital. You shared with us your perspectives of regional integration, of resilience, of building capacity. From your perspective, what is your vision on the centrality of digitalization for the future of trade in Africa, for the future of regional integration, and how do you see, Your Excellency, the role of science, technology, education to revitalize our education to ensure that we can fully embrace these emerging technologies that is changing everything? As a president, what is your vision for digitalization for Africa, for building capacity on manufacturing, and to build the capacity on the patents, the capabilities for African scientists to be able to patent technologies that can be commercialized and tradable? Thank you, Your Excellency.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really glad this question came up because I was going to be very worried if it didn't come. I was going to be very worried. We in Africa lag behind the rest of the world in many respects, and least of all, digital technology. But if you look at the rate of growth of the largest firms in the world, the ones that have grown fastest and generated the most revenue and income on the main are those in the digital tech space. And so when you transpose that to a geography and a people, this, where we are today with our development as Africa and Africans, presents the best opportunity of not just catching up, but even overtaking. Right? Not just catching up, but even overtaking. And it's possible, it's within reach. If you imagine what it takes, how long it takes to train somebody to be able to innovate and develop an application relative to the huge infrastructure costs of building a dam or a road or a spaceship, we can do it. Many of our kids, 12-year-olds, who are exposed to the same environments in the digital tech space as those in developing countries, do just as well and sometimes beat them. And so it's up to you and I to make sure that we provide that ambient environment for our young people particularly, but not to forget the the dinosaurs like us, we could also catch up. And so our education, both in the written curriculum and the unwritten, must really focus on that. And you know, if we saved a lot of the money we waste either through corruption or money we waste through ostentatious expenditure, we could educate so many more Africans who could become the global icons in a few short years. Now imagine if somebody in Africa had developed the WeChat. I guess you know what WeChat is. Why are you so quiet? I'm beginning to doubt it. Imagine in Africa if somebody had developed some other application that had global demand and sold just for $1. That's massive. Now, we have the World Intellectual Property Organization right here in Geneva, and I'm glad I'm visiting them. I've got a few words to exchange with them because I have some asks and wants for my own country, but the same could be said for the rest of Africa, and I'll say it here and now. If we are to add value to our raw materials, we need to develop processes. Either we buy those processes or we develop new ones. If they are novel, and I hope many would be novel, we have the opportunity of patenting those. And if we patent them and we are the largest reservoir of the most undeveloped raw materials in the world, come on, you don't need to think too hard about what it could do. You don't. So we go out and do that. So I urge every African leader at various levels of leadership, strata of leadership, to make sure that we have the capacity to develop our value chains, the capacity and the legal framework to protect our patents and our copyrights. It's extremely important. In Botswana, we take it as, it's almost religious now. We so believe in it because it's an avenue out of our near total reliance on a natural resource, rare as it may be, our diamonds. But those are finite. But you know, in Botswana, we want to be involved with diamonds until the end of diamonds. And that time will never come. And so the only way to do that is to have the intellectual capacity and the wherewithal to make sure that we add value at every stage. So good luck. You have a job to do, Mr. Ambassador.
Director General, can I have you comment on that as well?
Yeah, just a quick comment to add that I so share the view that digital is the future, because we are also looking at the numbers in trade, and digitally delivered services trade is the fastest growing segment of trade. You know, so it's been growing at 8% per annum from 2005 until 2022. Compared to goods trade, growing at about 5%. And during the pandemic was growing at 14%. And now, of the $7 trillion in service trade, digitally delivered services is $4 trillion. But why am I saying this? I think it's the wave of the future, and that it offers us in Africa a unique opportunity to really tap into this. Right now, we're less than 1% of these services. So if we pay attention to digital, this is really an area where Africa could tap in. But my second comment was a little bit of rebellion on the digital, because we did develop something in Africa which I thought has not been acknowledged by the world as much as if it had been done elsewhere, which is the mobile money and payment system developed in Kenya,
M-Pesa.
M-Pesa. And I'm afraid that it will just die out. People don't talk about it the way that I think they should. M-Pesa was one of the first systems to allow people to transfer money and is widely used on the continent and even on some other continents. So I keep wondering, why don't I hear people talking about M-Pesa? So I'm rebelling a little bit also that when something is developed in Africa, we don't hear about it. It's not on everybody's lips. And my answer is, why not?
Yeah, hopefully that will change. Any more questions from the floor, please? Okay, the gentleman over there.
Thank you, Excellency. A privilege to be here, and thank you, DG, for organizing. I have a question regarding some of the success stories of Botswana in the economy. And you are just thinking on top of my mind, tourism is one, of course, but the meat industry, it's also a very good success story. So my question is, which do you think were the factors, the virtuous circle that made the meat industry in Botswana of such outstanding quality? And which was the role of the state? And I come from Argentina, which has quite a good, not only soccer, also meat.
I was about to say. Your Excellency, no, I was about to say that His Excellency is the ambassador of Argentina.
Yes. Yes, no, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I think the debate about who is a better soccer player will be ended very quickly. But the meat, you know, the critical suspect factor to do with our beef, the best beef in the world, the best beef in the world. I mean, you can take it and analyze it, but the best analyst is your tongue and your taste buds. A lot of it has to do with the husbandry and the environment in which we raise our beef. The climatic conditions. Our cattle tend to graze grass, good quality grass. The government and the role of the state has been to make sure that we provide a layer of protection around those attributes that make our beef so good. So we don't want our cattle polluted. So we promulgate laws and regulations to make sure that no contaminants go into our cattle. So we have no additives to quicken the pace of growth or change the shape of our animals. So nature takes its course. Organic. Our cattle walk out to graze. They are not fed as they sleep and bulge. Yes, we come close to singing to them. I mean, we whistle and we call them names, and it can get very, romantic. But the critical thing is to look after them really well. And then we also have established that when they are transformed to become beef, we do it at a particular age. At a particular age. You notice I didn't say we slaughter or kill our cattle. We just transform them into beef. at a particular age. And we ensure that when we transport them, there are certain cuts that should never be frozen. I don't know if you know that. Never frozen, but chilled. But the best is if you actually had somebody who knew how to prepare it. Then it really tastes good. Now, even the doctor will tell you, eat Botswana beef. Yes? So the government's role has really been to promote the gene quality, to promote good husbandry, to promote good range management, to promote disease management. And we put in, with the help of others, the first facility to actually produce vaccines, because we were devastated by foot and mouth. And so we are, I think, the leading producer of foot and mouth vaccines in Africa. And the R&D keeps, growing because of mutations and such. And so we've produced a purified version, because foot and mouth is the biggest one of the biggest transmitters of that in Botswana is the buffalo. And we have a purified vaccine now that is very efficacious. But it has its challenges because it's still a raw product. We still need to value add. And we are dead determined to try and cut out where the leakages take place in between the abattoir and the market. And part of it is this refusal by the multinationals, some of whom we work with, that trade in our best markets, their refusal to allow our beef to be labeled Botswana beef. But we're gonna get rid of it. We're gonna stop it, because you must look out going forward for Botswana beef. BOTSWANA. Botswana beef.
Thank you for that. I think we just have time for one more question. So can somebody raise their hand? Okay. Yes. Yes, I've been looking for one.
Thank you very much. My name is Nadia Theodore. I'm the ambassador for Canada. Thank you very much for your very insightful lecture. I know we're not supposed to be making statements, but I cannot go away without saying how well represented you are here at the WTO and in Geneva by our sister, Ambassador Athaliah. And my question for you spoke about trade and gender, you spoke about trade and health, you spoke about trade and digital. The one thing that I did not hear us talk about here today yet is trade and climate change. And so I was just wondering if you could provide your thoughts from a Botswana perspective or from an African continent perspective on how the changing nature of climate is affecting the country and the continent, and the role that trade might be able to play in helping us overcome that. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. I think we didn't mention it directly, but it was implied. Botswana is, along with Namibia, one of the most water-deprived countries in Africa, at least in Southern Africa. And so when we experience the effects of climate change, as we do, it makes so much more meaning when we ascribe a certain value to the production of either services or goods that have been responsive to climate change. We more easily understand the logic of being responsible climate stewards. We think we can add to our criterial attributes of what defines provenance in all goods or services that we trade in when we put in climate responsible behaviors and actions. Besides, with temperatures rising, we face enormous challenges. We've seen it in our neighborhood with the number of cyclones that have devastated our neighbors. The most recent were Malawi, Mozambique, Madagascar. And last year was Adia in Zimbabwe, But we in Botswana had almost gotten accustomed to this perhaps before others because, almost every other year, we face a drought. And I mean a real drought, not a Swiss drought, a real drought. And water is very precious. And so we'd want to promote and associate ourselves with those who want to ascribe values to climate responsible behaviors. In fact, we even began some years ago a natural resource accounting system where we add to our accounts the value of our natural resources. Yes, it was a major move in our big conservation story. We're very rich in wildlife. We have incredible wildlife, but we also face the risk of that wildlife being decimated. We have one of the largest inland deltas in the world, the Okavango. We are recipients or beneficiaries of waters that flow from the highlands of Angola, and they drain into Botswana and create this masterpiece of a wetland. But that is threatened by climate change. So our whole tourism, or a major part of our tourism industry, could actually be wiped out. So we're very sensitive to this, and we associate ourselves with every measure to protect our environment. And I think these, when described, when given a value, should be tradable. And we can also barter with those who have been most responsible for climate change. At least the legal guilt they could account for is to pay for some of it, finally.
And finally, Director General, just walk us through, just to continue on from what His Excellency was saying about ways we can reduce carbon footprint rather, through trade in terms of greening supply chains and that sort of thing.
Well, before I respond, I want to mention that there's another formidable lady from Botswana who has been at the WTO, and she's the Director of Budget, Madam Ntisana Phillips from Botswana. She's the Director of Budget and Administration. So we're surrounded by formidable ladies from Botswana. Well, I'm so heartened, before I say, by what His Excellency said about the ascribing to the environmental objectives and being so clear on the impact of climate change. Because I think this is an existential threat. And unless we can, marshal all the tools we have to be able to deal with it, including looking at, from the trade perspective, what can be done, it will be a very difficult situation that we find ourselves in. I also agree that, of course, Africa, as I said in a recent speech, contributes less than 3% or less than 4% of carbon emissions to the world. And so a just transition for the continent that tries to look at how to support it to have adequate time for the adoption of renewables, which we have to do. We have to move towards climate responsive behavior and responsible behavior. There's absolutely no way out. But I think the timing of how we do it, according to what was agreed in Paris, is just something we need to be given the room and the resources to make that happen. It's essential that those resources that were promised, the $100 billion plus, which is a drop in the bucket, that those also be provided. But so from our perspective, I think that one of the things I'd like to say is looking at what's happening with climate change. What at the WTO, I think this might seem obvious, but one of the biggest ways to help members deal with resilience is actually to keep a free, fair, and open trading system. Because the way climate change is working, today you might be a food producer. Tomorrow you may not be. Today, you might not be a food producer, but because of the change in the way that water flows and is received, I'm also on a commission for water, and I'm listening to what you're saying. We're finding that water, we can't solve climate change unless we also solve the water problem, both together. And it could be the next day you will not be. You'll be a producer when you were not. So what if we see these switches happening? How do we then get food from where it's made to those who used to make it but no longer can? It's through trade. So I'm absolutely clear that a free, fair, and open, predictable trading system underpinned by WTO rules is crucial to fighting climate change. I think also facilitating the transfer of green technologies and their adoption is also something that trade is, does. We've actually found in a study that the drop in the cost of solar panels over these 3 decades, 40% of that drop is due to the economies of scale provided by trade, among other factors. So I think trade is a very positive instrument in fighting climate change. People look at it as part of the problem because of the logistics of trade. And of course, some of that is true. And we need to look at the logistics and how we move to green hydrogen, for our shipping, our aviation. But it is a huge instrument in adaptation, in mitigation, and through transfer of technology and other modalities. Thank you.
Thank you. And can we just have a round of applause for both of our esteemed guests this afternoon? The lecture series, of course, isn't designed to provide instant solutions, but just by opening up this forum of discussion and sharing ideas, I think that we can come up with some key solutions. I mean, I loved what you said, Your Excellency, about the importance of digital transformation. I thought that was a great question. Obviously, the role of trade in reducing the world's carbon footprint. I mean, I thought that was fascinating when you said, look, one day you can be a food producer, the next day you might not. Obviously, climate change is completely reorganizing and reshaping the global dynamics when it comes to economies and trade as well. And thank you so much for sharing your experience about what happened during the pandemic to your country. You've got Botswana, you would think on the outside, a very resilient economy, just given what you've achieved in terms of growing your economy. But then you have this once in a generation economic shock. And, of course, having to start from scratch and realizing just how dependent you are, many African countries as well, on the West. And that also needs to be rethought as well. So thank you both so much. I'd like to welcome Ambassador Molokomme for the vote of thanks. Oh, yes. That's what I interviewed you about, yeah.
Your Excellency, Tautona. Tautona means the president, the big lion. Director General, Madam DG, First Lady, Matsile, as we call her, Honorable Ministers, MPs, Excellencies, colleague ambassadors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor to stand before you today wearing 2 hats. You may not see them, but I have 2 hats on my head. One is Ambassador of the Republic of Botswana to the WTO, and the other as chairperson of the WTO General Council. I'm especially pleased to give a brief vote of thanks following the delivery by my own head of state of the second in the series of the presidential lectures here at the WTO. Thank you, Your Excellency, for gracing the WTO Council room with your presence and sharing your insights and wisdom with the diplomatic community, academics, and other distinguished guests in the CR room and online. This I especially appreciate, I must say, at a personal level, Your Excellency, because I know that you had a large number of official engagements in Bern and the surrounding areas in your just ended extremely successful state visit, for which I would like to congratulate you and thank the Swiss Confederation for their hospitality. This reflects Your Excellency's commitment, which I already know about, but for you to be sitting up here, Your Excellency, in the humble corridors, in the council room where we slave every day, we speak, we negotiate, we agree, we disagree. For me, it's truly an inspiration for you to have stepped on this podium. It allows me to continue, soldier on, doing the work for which you have sent me here. Allow me, Excellencies, to express my sincere gratitude to the DG, Madam Dr. Ngozi, for inviting His Excellency President Masisi to speak at this prestigious event. The presence of so many distinguished guests here and online, as well as the interaction we have witnessed, is a testament to the importance of the subject matter that we are discussing today. Your Excellency, I was very proud of your dialoguing with the crowd. I thought I saw my colleagues raising their hands. I thought, oh, they're going to fix me now. They'll stand up and praise me, and they will ask my president all the questions that they know I may not have prepared him. But now you understand how you can explain the energy and zeal and hunger with which I move around these corridors. I have a president who's very well informed, if I may be modest, and who actually expects only the best and the best quality performances. Thank you so much, sir. Madam DG, this is a great initiative, not because you invited my president and before him the very impressive Prime Minister of Barbados. I see my colleague, the former ambassador of Barbados, nodding over there. He stood here a year ago doing what I'm doing, so I took some lessons from you, my brother Chad. This has been very well received, I believe, this initiative, and will continue to attract presidents and heads of states to the WTO, and I think the WTO deserves this kind of attention. I think presidents belong here. This is not only an organization for ministers to come and negotiate trade agreements and so on. Your secretariat team, DG, in charge of this event, led by DDG Zhang, Chief of Staff Dr. Bright, and others in your office have executed this task with professionalism and excellence. Not that it surprised me. This is how the secretariat is. The interpreters, I see you up there who've done their part to make sure that we all understand what is being said and are able to communicate with each other. To you, my colleagues, I know you know this is the Mutual Admiration Society. When your minister comes or your president comes, we tend to stand up and say, what a great ambassador you have, Mr. President. I still appreciate it, sir. And I most appreciate even more the fact that you came and that you interacted with His Excellency. I reiterate my thanks to you for the trust that you have reposed in me and the privilege to chair the General Council of the WTO. I know that a number of academic students and other members of International Geneva are here, as well as Botswana citizens based here. Thank you so much for your presence and participation. I believe and trust that the conversation held today will stimulate the discussions in the WTO that are critical to shaping the future of global trade and trade relations between Africa and the rest of the world. As I end, our moderator, the one and only Zain Asher, CNN, thank you for conducting. Thank you, dear sister, for doing what you do best, with grace and flair, with which we have come to expect from you. Thank you once again for everyone that has made this event a success. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Right, and that does it for this year's lecture series. Thank you again, Ambassador Molokomme, for that great speech. Thank you. And thank you, Your Excellency. And thank you, DG.